Well, I'm joined now by the National Chair of the Prison Officers Association, Mark Fairhurst. Good evening. Thanks for being with us. So this is an unusual thing, a serving governor speaking out like this. Do you recognise the picture that he is painting?
I think every serving prison officer on the front line can resonate with exactly what's being said in that report. We are dealing with an increasingly violent cohort of prisoners who have no respect for authority. We are overwhelmed in overcrowded prisons that are dilapidated and in need of modernisation. And long term, we need a sentencing strategy that will reduce the prison population, because one thing's for sure, you cannot build your way out of this crisis.
How close do you think things are to breaking point in the prison service in this country?
I think the prison service is already broken. That's why we've released people early, and we need major investment. You know, you're trying to build new prisons. Labour have earmarked £4 billion of taxpayers' money to build new prisons. The problem being they take years to build and you'll always fill them. Who's going to staff these new prisons? Nobody wants to be a prison officer anymore. The retirement age is too high, the workplace is too violent, and the wages are too low.
Well, on that point, how close are we to losing increasing numbers of prison officers who just want out, just want to quit?
Well, the problem is many jails now are fully staffed. Some have exceeded their staffing levels, but we're still short of staff on a daily basis because of high sickness levels and restricted duties on people who've been temporarily promoted. And what we tend to find now is we will train people, spend millions of pounds training them, and they'll last less than 2 years. Over 50% of our staffing complement leave within the first 2 years of service. So things need to change. The training is not fit for purpose. They only do 6 weeks. And then they're a fully qualified prison officer. We are setting people up to fail.
So the question is what to do about it. In the short term, are early prisoner releases the answer, the only answer?
I think there's no other option than to release people to give us some breathing space so we have the opportunity to stabilise our prisons. But long term, that £4 billion, instead of building new prisons, that could be used for so much good. We could modernise the entire prison estate. We could use it to fund a probation service that is overwhelmed and understaffed. And we could create more mental health beds in our communities to rid our prisons with the people who've got really severe mental health disorders. But the only place for them is a prison because there's nowhere in our communities to house them. That, along with reducing the remand population and only remanding into custody those accused of the most serious offences, would help us reduce the population long term. But something needs to change, Mark, because we can't go on like this.
So how much of this, I mean, presumably in prisons like the one the governor was describing, the chances of any meaningful rehabilitation is very limited. And so how much of this problem is that prisoners are just, you know, coming back all the time?
So we need an opportunity to rehabilitate people, and we can't do that if we're used as a human warehouse. So, for example, Wandsworth was built to hold 950, currently holds between 1,500 and 1,600 people. So if you're in a prison that's only got limited activity spaces, you can't provide an activity space for everybody to address their offender behaviour. So long term, it makes sense to reduce the prison population so we can give people educational skills, work skills, and send them on offender behaviour programmes inside our jails. We simply can't do that. That's why people are banged up for prolonged periods. You're trying to get justice on the cheap. You can't get justice on the cheap. If you want something on the cheap, go and buy a budgie. They go cheap all day.
And I mean, he was saying, the governor was saying that, you know, they're going to have to change the way, long term, they're going to have to change the way people are sentenced. So those for serious crimes, violence, I think the other thing he said was organised crime. He made the point about organised crime as well. Those are the people who should be in prison, and on other sorts of crimes, other sorts of sentence should be more appropriate. Do you agree with that?
I do long term, and that's why we need a strategy, and we're happy to sit down with the government to formulate one. So, for example, I think there's too many female offenders in our prisons. Many female offenders are in for relatively short periods. They've got very complex needs, and there's an alternative to custody for them. It could be catastrophic in some cases, when they lose their homes and their children. We've got a lot of short sentences that we could house in the community, but that takes investment in an overworked probation service. We could rid our prisons of foreign national offenders and repatriate them. And of course, we've got the indeterminate sentences. A lot of people are way over their tariff because they've got no release date. Because of the IPP sentence, that needs to be looked at as well. So there are lots of options, but you have to have a government that's brave enough to go against the public will and do something that's reformative of this system. We simply can't go on.
Right. Do you see any sign that this is a priority, or it will be a priority for this new government?
The priority at the moment is to rid our prisons because they're so overcrowded and release people 10% earlier. I agree with that, but that only gives us about 12 months breathing space. So the priority moving forward is sentence reform, a modern prison estate, and plough that £4 billion earmarked for new build prisons back into the system and fund our public services the way they deserve to be funded so we can serve our communities.
Okay, Mark Fairhurst, appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on. Thank you.
Very welcome.